to our virtual Emerging Leaders series this afternoon. This is a series that we've been doing through the Office of External Affairs here at John Jay, together with the Department of Latin American and Latinx Studies, to focus on emerging leaders in the city of New York. And today we are very lucky because we have one of the leading progressive voices in the city. Councilmember Diana Ayala represents the 8th Councilmanic District, which includes East Harlem and parts of the South Bronx. She was elected to the City Council in a very, very tough race back in 2017. And she, among other things, is the co-chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus, as well as chair of the Committee on Mental Health, Disabilities, and Addictions. What we're going to do today is that I want to introduce Councilmember Ayala, have her tell us a little bit about herself, and then we're going to dive into some questions about her work in the New York City Council. While we're doing that, I want to encourage those of you who have joined us this afternoon to send questions in the chat at the bottom of this Zoom screen. Our staff is going to put them together. They're going to get them to me, and I'll be happy to present those to the council member. I wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded. And I think that's about it. So let's get this underway. Council member, welcome to John Jay. I think you're muted.
I can't. Okay, there you go.
There you are.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. Sorry.
That's okay.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining. I hope you're getting extra credit for being here today. I don't intend to torture you all, but thank you for the invitation. It was really humbling to receive that. I'm Councilmember Diana Ayala. I represent the 8th Councilmanic District, which is made up of East Harlem, the South Bronx, including Mott Haven, Longwood, the West Concourse, and Highbridge. So really the Bronx district is part of the district. Is almost like 4 unique districts in and of its own. I have been in office since 2017, and I have been in this office actually with I worked here for Councilmember Melissa Mark-Viverito since 2006. So I've been around for a while. But my roots started in Puerto Rico. I was born in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico, and the second eldest of 8 children. My mother moved us to New York City when I was 5 years old, and we settled in the Lower East Side. We lived there in a tenement building that was rat infested, and you could hear the rats running through the walls in the middle of the night until there was a devastating fire that forced us into shelter just a few blocks away from that building. And then a few months after that, we were approved for an apartment in the public housing development right across the street from the shelter. And so I didn't steer too far. I'm not sure how many of you have read my bio, but I grew up there in the Lillian-walled houses, and at the age of 16, actually the night before my 16th birthday, my boyfriend was murdered. He was shot and killed while I was 3 months pregnant. So I was a teenage parent with no support because my baby's father had been brutally murdered on the streets on 7th Street and Avenue D. It was a very difficult time, for a lot of us. A lot of our friends, unfortunately, that summer and a few summers before then had fallen victim to gun violence. So it really has helped steer me, into the conversation of gun violence and how it affects communities like the ones that I represent now. So it has greatly influenced my work to date. And then I of course, dropped out of school because I was, I had this baby now and I was on public assistance and I, had no clue what I was going to do and moved to the South Bronx. Was able to get an apartment by the time I was 18. I was emancipated from my mother. And then now I had entered into a second relationship that was very abusive, that resulted in another child. And so by the time that I was 20 years old, now I was a single parent of 2 children. my son Abraham and my daughter Anna, who are already grown adults at 30 and 27. And I had no income. I had nothing. I was on public assistance. I had no education. I had no support because I was in the Bronx and my family was in Manhattan. And so I decided to go to night school. At Bronx Community College, they offered a really unique opportunity to get your high school diploma through their night program. And while I was there, I was really fascinated by the college, environment. I had never been to college and I had never known anyone that had gone to college before me. So it was really interesting to be there. While there, I decided I wanted to be a nurse and then realized that I'm afraid of blood. I hate chemistry. I'm horrible at it. And so that maybe that was not for me, but I knew that I was really good with people and that for some reason or the other, I not only enjoyed listening to other people's problems, but that I was a really great problem solver. And so I said, well, maybe I'll try my hand at, in the human services field. And so a professor of mine said, well, what do you want to do? I mean, the field is so broad. Like, who do you see? What type of work do you envision yourself doing? And I said, I have no idea. Maybe I'll work with children. And he said, well, don't you have children at home? I said, I do. He says, well, you don't want to do that for work and at home. Would you consider working with the elderly? And I said, sure. So I ended up working at a homebound senior program where I met a good friend of mine who then became my boss, who brought me to East Harlem. And that's how I was introduced to East Harlem, where a few years later, I've met the newly elected council member of the 8th District, Melissa Mark Viverito, who asked me to take a position in her office. I did not want to take that position. So I want to be really honest with people that, I had no clue who my councilmatic representatives were. I didn't know anything about politics. And I think that that's not unique to people like me because I'm a survivalist, right? And I was trying to work and go to school and take care of my children and pay the rent. And I had no time for politics. I really didn't have the time to pay attention to what was happening, right, in the world. So I knew little bits and pieces. So I didn't think that I was a good candidate for this position. And, she immediately said, no, we're looking for someone that is community oriented, that's good with people, that understands the issues, and that is you. We don't need you to be politically savvy, right? So I accepted the position and I kind of worked my way through it, right? I had to kind of figure out, well, what does Diana Ayala bring to the table? And I was really afraid to do that because I was, intimidated by just being here. And realized shortly after that people that would come into this office really were a reflection of me. They were like a mirror image of me. They came in here with the same issues that I had, right? They came in here because they were homeless looking for housing. They came in here because, they were living in dilapidated, housing situations. They came in here because they were going through a domestic violence issue. They came in here because they were food insecure. And so I knew those issues really well. And so I could help from a different, perspective, right? I can lend my lens and my experiences to that. And so, in my time here, my predecessor, obviously we've had conversations about who would lead her at some point. And we knew that we always wanted to support women because there just simply aren't enough women, that represent us in government. And it's not to take away for the men because we have, fantastic men that are, totally equipped to do the same work. But if we don't really try to be a little bit more purposeful, then we kind of, neglect the possibility of bringing in more women. And so she says to me when she's 2 years before she ended her term, she says, I would like to have dinner with you. And I said, well, what are we discussing? And she says, well, just come. And so I got to dinner and she says, well, what do you think about running for public office? And I said, well, I don't think about running for public office. And she says, well, you should think about running for public office. I'm leaving in 2 years and I would really, I think that you would make a wonderful council member. I think, that you have all of the attributes that we would look for, right? You're caring and you love the community and you come from a humble, place. And I can trust all of these projects that I have worked so hard on. And I know that, you will carry them through. And I said, are you crazy? I have no political experience. Again, let me remind you all, I have no political experience. I know nobody that's political other than the people that I have met through this work in this office. When I get home, my family has no idea what I do all day. They don't care. They don't want to talk about it. And so I just really was really scared of the idea of doing that because I just didn't see myself in that role. Not because I didn't feel myself qualified. Well, in a way, yeah, I think there was a little bit of that, but the idea, the picture, right, that we put out, or that's put out publicly of what an elected official looks like, sounds like, behaves is very different than what I see in the mirror when I look at myself. And so it took a little bit of nudging for me to see that there is a need for people like me with those lived experiences to also be represented at the table when decisions are being made about us. And so that's why I decided to run for city council.
Now, you ran, first of all, I think that story, I don't know that I know anyone who goes from, I don't know anything about politics to I'm going to run for city council, right? In a very hotly contested race with a lot of candidates. That I think is something that our students need to hear. You don't necessarily need a political background in order to do this, right? That's, in fact, that's the big point about a representative democracy, right? That we want all these multiple voices. I want you to, if you could, council member, to tell me, because you happen to step into a seat representing two of the most historically iconic Latino communities in the city of New York, right? El Barrio in Harlem and the South Bronx, right? The South Bronx. You know, that this is, tell me about the district and what you learned as somebody who came from Loisaida. Like, tell me a little bit about what was similar, what was different, what you see now happening in
Yeah.
this district.
So, you know, it's interesting that you asked because having grown up in Loisaida, when I grew up in Loisaida, Loisaida was Loisaida, right? And you go
Sure.
there
Yeah.
now and it's not even, there's not even any, not, you know, there's nothing there that reminds you of what it used to be. Now, true, it was riddled in crime back in the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, but there was a lot of cultural personality. There was a historical content that is missing. Like there's nothing there now. And so when I moved, I lived in the Bronx while I worked in East Harlem. So I worked in East Harlem for over almost 20 years before I moved here. And I did that because of my children, not for political reasons. But I realized the similarities in the communities, right? And this is before I even started to dive into the Bronx part of the district and realized that gentrification was kind of like creeping in. And what that did to the Lower East Side, you know, really resonated with me. And I was really petrified at that. The idea that we would completely disappear a people, a culture, from a community in the way that it was done in the Lower East Side. And I was very fortunate because again, you know, Melissa was really, you know, she was an excellent leader and very protective of that. But, you know, we've worked really hard, not only to try to slow down, right, the extent of the wave of gentrification that was occurring in East Harlem, which I think that we've been successful somewhat, but really have fought hard to preserve the cultural history. And so just today I was having a conversation about La Marqueta, right? And La Marqueta is very significant for the Puerto Rican community because when the Puerto Ricans migrated to New York City, that you couldn't even buy and I don't want to say the Goya name because I know some people feel very whatever, but you couldn't buy your Goya beans, you couldn't buy your sazon anywhere, you couldn't even buy eggs, to be honest, because there were no delis, right? And so people flocked to La Marqueta, and this is where they would find, you know, those products that reminded them of home. So we've been very protective of that and just very mindful of what the effects of gentrification can do on a community and how it can totally disappear an entire population of people.
Right. I mean, those are big issues all over the city, but I think you're absolutely right. You know, El Barrio is in some ways ground zero for a lot of these fights. El Barrio, Northern Manhattan in particular, in the last 10 years has become a real battlefield around these issues, right? Because they're seen as the last quote unquote affordable areas, right? They haven't built high rises just yet, or as many as right?
And they won't. But I'll tell you, like, I remember many years ago when I was a foster parent in the 90s, and I remember going with one of my foster children to therapy on 42nd Street, and when we came out, there was a bomb threat, and so we waited and waited as long as we could, and it was getting dark, and the kids were hungry, and I said, you know what, let's just take a cab, right? But I live in the Bronx, and I took a cab, and the yellow cab literally dropped you off, because this is what would happen. They would drop you off on 96th Street, and then you had to take a gypsy cab.
Yep.
Because they would not pass that 96th Street border. So
Yep.
now to see so many yellow cabs in East Harlem in the South Bronx is almost like, what the hell is happening, right? This is
Right.
unreal. But it's not even like a good reality, right? It's like scary because you're like, people are now that did not find this community attractive, are now interested in coming here. And that scares the bejesus out of a lot of people. But we've been lucky, and I have to give credit to a lot of our nonprofit organizations who had the foresight to really acquire a significant, number of housing portfolios that allowed us to be able to continue to stabilize in a time when we thought that we were going to be in serious trouble.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot that we can talk about. There are a couple of things in particular that I wanted to get you to help us understand a little bit. One of them is this question of mental health, right?
Yeah.
You're the chair of the council's mental health committee. It has always been a significant issue in New York. In this COVID world, it has become even a bigger issue, I think. It is cutting across lines of class and race and gender, although disproportionately, I think, affecting Black and Brown communities for sure. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, how did you decide that you wanted to be on the mental health committee, one, and then two, give me a sense of the one or two issues right now that you guys are working on at the council around this issue.
So it was actually, there was a meeting. So whenever a new speaker is elected, the speaker meets with all of the members and pretty much tries to gauge what our interest is and the things that we're really passionate about, and makes decisions on who should be sitting on what committee based on that information. And so Speaker Johnson asked me, he said, Diana, well, what are you interested in? Like, if you had the opportunity to chair a committee, which committee would you chair? And so I gave him a list of committees. And as I was exiting the meeting, I said, one more I forgot, but it's a very important one. And he said, what? And I said, mental health. And the reason I said mental health was because I come from a family where many of my cousins, my mother, my brother, my sister, suffer from serious mental illness. And so I had been kind of navigating that world for the last few years prior to coming to the council, and was really frustrated with the red tape, that it took to actually get someone connected to services. And so I thought that it was important. And I also really so that committee is a little bit complicated because it's mental health, disabilities, and addiction. And so the disabilities and the addiction part, unfortunately, are also very much a fabric, part of the fabric of my life, and what makes up Diana Ayala. And so I knew those issues too intimately, and that I couldn't pass up the opportunity to kind of weigh in.
Right.
Now, in terms of like what are the issues that we're dealing with now, is one, ensuring that there is access to mental health services, especially in light of COVID. Telehealth has become a really big issue now, which is great. Actually, it's really good. My mother uses it. She doesn't mind. I speak about her all the time, so there are no privacy issues. She's actually been really great about allowing me to share her story. But having the flexibility of being home and taking that that call via Zoom or WebEx or whatever has been really enlightening, and it's kind of life changing for a lot of people, because it takes away from the stigma of having to go into the facility itself. But the reality is that not a lot of people are connected to social media or have access to a smartphone and can access care in that way. And the truth is that we still have a serious shortage of mental health providers out there, right? especially mental health providers that are linguistically appropriate. And the fact still remains that the federal government and the state pay out so little in terms of Medicaid reimbursement that it doesn't really incentivize enough mental health providers to, to want to be a part of the community clinics that,
Right.
unfortunately, we have too little of. Um, so those are some of the things we're doing a lot right now. So we realized during the pandemic, when the governor shut down the train stations at night in an effort to kind of get, disincentivize homeless people from sleeping and living in the train stations, that, many of them suffer from chronic mental illness. And we just do not have the services, we do not have the capacity right now to meet that need. So we're trying to figure out where the disconnect is. Is it something that the city is doing wrong? Is the fact that the state is closing mental health inpatient programs contributing to what we're seeing on the street? I think, we're learning as we go, but it's been a very interesting phenomenon what we're seeing, post COVID.
Right. I think let me just say, John Jay has just started a human services and counseling program.
Awesome.
So I think one of for our students, I think hearing that there is demand for people with experience or who can enter into the mental health field from that angle, I think is really really important.
We're
Tell me.
having a hearing on Friday also with Councilmember Barron. Is a mental health and higher ed combined committee on
Hmm.
mental health services available to students.
That's a big issue, obviously, I think, on all of the CUNY campuses, right? It's things like food insecurity, access to mental health services, and all within the context of what you've just explained, right? More telemedicine, not being able to get to a therapist's office, not being able to do face-to-face stuff. I think we're going to be dealing with this, unfortunately, for a while. Let me actually, and the order of the questions in my head became disordered. And I wanted to ask you just to give us a big sense or a macro sense of the impact of COVID just in general in your community, because if you look at the district, it was hard hit just in terms of the total number of cases, the infection rate. Like, tell us, how has this changed the district, if at all? How did you respond? What did you think was the best way to respond as the council member representing the district?
Well, it was really interesting because, again, life has a way of including me in a lot of this. And I was, like everybody else, not really understanding the impact that COVID was going to have on the city in the beginning. And I remember having that first hearing, and we kept hearing, well, you don't need to use a mask unless you're sick, right? And so we worked off of that philosophy, like, we don't need to use a mask. You're sick, you're not sick, you don't need to use it. We closed the office in around mid-March, and I went out to a couple of events. Now, my husband actually works out of the house because he has to leave, and so we both got sick in early April. I remember it was my mother's birthday, and thinking, oh my God, like, we live in a 3-bedroom apartment. There are about 8 of us. I have a daughter that lives underneath us, that takes care of my mother and my father, who's bedbound. He's seriously sick. We have one bathroom. How the heck are we gonna manage without spreading this throughout the entire apartment? Which we did. Right, we did. Thankfully, my dad was spared, because he's really so sick that had this gotten to him, he probably wouldn't be here today. But my story is not different than many of the constituents that I represent, right? We represent a constituency of, Black and brown people who unfortunately are doubled and tripled up in apartments, who don't have the luxury of isolating, in a private hotel. They can't leave their apartment and go somewhere else. They're stuck together. And unfortunately, many of them didn't even realize that they were sick. They refused to believe that they were sick. And this happened in my house too. My mother got sick. My mother was coughing, and I was maybe in day 9, day 10. And she was coughing, and I said, "You okay?" She says, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." And I said, are you sure? She says, yeah. So then I asked, yeah, let it be. I said, maybe she has a little cough. The next day she's coughing again. And I said, are you sure that you're okay? Can I take your temperature? So I took her temperature, and lo and behold, she had a temperature, she
Right.
had a cold. And I said, Mom, I think you have COVID, but because you don't mind your business and you keep coming in my room to try to help me, which is what happens, right? That's
Sure,
part of
that's
who
real
we
life.
are.
Right.
Yeah. And so we
Right.
help each other, right? And you want to be there. And so she kept coming into the room, offering us food and offering us, all type of stuff. And so she gets sick. But getting her to believe that she was sick, to understand that she was sick, was impossible. It took her getting hospitalized. And then she comes back home and she goes, could you believe that they did a blood test and I had COVID? Yeah, I
Yes,
told
of
you that
course.
you had
Right.
COVID. I told you that it was COVID, but that was really what was happening in the community. A lot of people were sick and did not know that they were. I think because we have a large concentration of public housing developments, the Public Housing Authority did not do the best job either at not only getting information out, but ensuring that the buildings were properly maintained at all times. The work was very sporadic. The information was very generalized. It was not really targeted to communities of color. It was not linguistically appropriate. No one came to rescue us. We really had to kind of figure it out on our own. We didn't
Right.
even have a testing site other than our one and only health and hospital site. Even though zip codes 10029 was like the highestly infected in the entire borough of Manhattan, Manhattan. Like, I'm like,
Right.
how do you not consider that when you're, when you're deciding where these resources are going to go? I remember even the Parks Department had like this humongous PPE distribution initiative, and East Harlem was completely left out of it. And I'm like, I, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? I have parts of Highbridge that are so food insecure that people are starving. And I had to literally beg. And I mean, I was out there every single day trying to ensure that there was food coming into the community because the local school
Right.
was shut down. So people had to just travel further in order to get, their needs met.
I think that's clearly one of the take-home lessons of this entire sad, painful episode, right? Is sort of the difference in access to infrastructure
Yes.
in communities. There's no question about that. We could go on, by the way, talking about all of this
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
But I want to get some of our students in. We have a couple of questions, and they deal with a whole bunch of different issues.
Yeah.
So just bear with me. So I guess the first question here is about DACA, right? And about the efforts that exist in your office or in the council to educate the public about DACA policy. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So, truth be told, I haven't really been involved in a lot of those efforts because
Okay.
Carlos Menchaca has been like, lobbying this baby for a
Sure.
really long time. And one of the things that, unfortunately is a reality for, many of us is that there are so many competing interests things that are just happening and things that need immediate attention at all times that we can't, focus primarily on like an issue. So some issues are primarily mine, some issues are primarily
Sure.
Carlos's, and this one happens to be a Carlos. But I will say that we do have, obviously we have DACA recipients in the community. And there's always, the fear that, I have a young man that's a neighbor of, actually he's a neighbor, his mother's a neighbor of mine, and he was picked up because he resembled somebody who had murdered someone. And he was 18 years old at the time. He had lived, he grew up here in New York City. He came from Mexico when he was about 3 or 4 years old. He didn't know anyone over there. And they were about to deport him. We were able to get him to stay, and he is now a DACA recipient. But there's always the underlying threat, right? That this is going to be removed,
Right.
This is going to be taken away, and that there's no real security behind it. So we really focus a lot of our attentions on educating, the community on what their rights are. So we have a lot of immigrant town halls. We have immigrant legal services here in the community, and we try to make sure that people know how to access those services. But as of late, we've been doing a lot of education around ICE. I don't know if you've heard, like ICE has been like knocking on people's doors and pretending to be NYPD. So really educating them on what their rights are if ICE happens to come knocking on their door.
Right.
because that's a real reality under this administration. And so while DACA is important, there's just so many competing things are happening that are affecting the immigrant community that is just
Right.
it's
Yeah. DACA is
powerful.
one piece, right,
Yeah.
of this broader problem
So we're
that we
grateful
have.
for DACA. Yeah, we're grateful for
Absolutely.
DACA.
Absolutely.
We would
Right.
like to see it continue, but in this administration, we just don't know.
Let me shift gears for a second, because we have another very sort of clear question from one of our students asking for your response to the recent protest. You've done work on the criminal justice system in New
Yes.
York a lot, and as a as a chief of staff in Melissa Mark Viverito's office. I'm sure that the Close Rikers campaign was, you guys were ground zero for that. Tell me a little bit about how you responded to the protest, where you see the direction of these protests, and the broader movement behind it heading, and what can you in the council do to sort of take that and turn it into really meaningful, longstanding change?
Well, I think that for those of you that may have participated in the protests and in the marches, thank you, because we cannot be witness to injustice and not participate right in the change that needs to happen. However, I'm an elected official, and so for me, it's not as black and white, right? Um, in the beginning of the protests, we were smack in the middle of a pandemic like none we've ever seen before. People were literally dying. Not even just people that you heard of, people that you knew. Every single day, there were 10, 15 people on your social media feed that you knew who had passed away. And so the mayor said, well, we want, we're going to have to absorb a cut. We have a $9 billion budget shortfall. Everybody's going to have to take a hit. And we understood that. We didn't like it, but we understood that. That was the reality that we were living in. Everybody proposed a budget cut. And then the NYPD said, well, here's our proposal. We're proposing a 1% cut. And so we said, no, absolutely not. That's just is disrespectful. We have health and hospitals started off on a deficit. They are offering up an 18% budget cut, and they're literally saving lives as we speak. How is it even, possible that we can accept an 18% cut from health and hospitals and yet think it okay to have a 1%? So we had already been having conversations about, the budget and the NYPD. And obviously, I mean, I can tell you stories on both sides of the, of the issue. I've had a son my oldest son, who has been stopped and frisked, when he was in his teen, and right before there was changes to stop and frisk, like he was stopped every single day, when we lived in the Bronx. So I've had that experience. And then I've also had the experience of having a son in front of his building, walking his dog, almost shot to death because I have gangbangers that, I happen to live smack in the middle of, who think it okay to carry guns and shoot them out in public in front of. So for me, I was really moved by the movement. I welcomed it, but it was very difficult on a lot of us because I think that we felt like we were put in a position where we had to choose one or the other, right? And I think that we were trying to do the best that we could in light of the situation. And we see ourselves as people that, try to be on legislators that try to be on the right side of the issues all of the time. But sometimes you just can't get to a place where everybody's happy.
Right.
And so this was a very difficult year for a lot of us, right? For a lot of reasons. There was a lot of injustice that was happening. We were witness to that. But when you think about on the city on a micro level, we have to balance the public safety of, communities like mine, right? That are over saturated in gun violence, right? And this was not just this year, because people will say there was an uptick. It's every single year for the last 4 or 5 years. I've had no less than 30 shootings in my district. I had a 6-year-old shot last year. I had a 5-year-old shot this year. I've had senior citizens that have been shot. And so I have to wrestle with all of that. So, I appreciate the protests. I think that, people should feel like we have heard them. And I think that we are working towards more just New York City. But I think that there are many avenues to do that, right? And the legislative avenue is a very useful, powerful tool that the
Right.
council and the state legislature have to ensure that that happens, right? So I think that actions speak louder than words, and that we should not be, really, you shouldn't just assume that because we vote one way that means that we don't care about the other side.
Right.
Um, so it was very hard. It was difficult.
I think one of the interesting things that you were a part of, because I think one of the underlying issues in police community relations is the question of trust, right?
Yes.
And one of the pieces of legislation that you co-sponsored that was enacted looked at giving us as citizens access to police records, right?
Yes.
That we as citizens have a right to look at the record of a police officer with some limited exceptions. And it seemed to me like that was the kind of legislative intervention that could help build trust again. I was really, really struck that you focused on that part of this this really complicated puzzle.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and we do that all the time. But one of the things that I will say, and I've said this to a lot of my friends that were out there protesting, is that it was it was an opportune time, right? Because we were in the middle of the budget process. But beyond the budget process, we should still continue to have these conversations, right? Because we're entering a new budget cycle next year. We have to vote on a budget by the end of next June, but we start having those conversations in January. And so if we, for me, it was just so chaotic. Everything was happening at the same time. I felt like a lot was lost in the translation. A lot of it was lost in the chaos of the moment. I think that that is important, that noise is important. But it's also important to have these conversations, these important conversations within the community. So in my community, for instance, I really didn't have a huge call, an outcry for defund the NYPD. And I think that it's really unfortunate because it's almost like the abused party asking for surveillance, right? Or what they feel keeps them,
That's
right, gives them
interesting.
that sense of security.
Yeah.
However, the truth is that, again, last year I remember going to 1PP personally, and I'm like, I need more officers to not so much patrol my community, but to keep at each perimeter of the developments that are being targeted, right? To ensure that no harm comes into the developments. And, it's important to do that. Like, I work very closely with the NYPD in my district to ensure that there's no abuse. And when I need to call them, I call on something, I call them on it.
Right.
I try to be fair and equitable, and I try to be very thoughtful about, my decision making.
We've had a couple of questions
Yeah.
from students asking about disabilities. And I want to go back to this because you're the chair of the committee, and it's such a big issue. Tell me a little bit about how you see, because I think disability activism has grown tremendously over the course of the last decade or so, right? Tell me what you see as effective in terms of advocacy from the disabled community in the city. What have you seen that's work? Where are the success stories? What can disabled people do to more actively and effectively make change at the council?
So unfortunately, I realized soon after taking over the committee, that we don't have a lot of jurisdiction around issues that really have an impact on the lives of people with disabilities in New York City, right? That a lot of those issues are handled by the state. However, we recently worked with like the Department of Transportation to increase the access of accessorized vehicles, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get an accessorized vehicle to its destination faster. And so the advocates got together and said, we really would like to be able to have access to the rapid bus service lanes, right? Why can't we have access to them? And so that was a really cool way of advocating around an issue, because transportation is a huge deal. There was also a pilot program. Again, it was a state-funded pilot program that allowed is a on-demand e-hail program that allows people with disabilities to access a cab, right? So you can call, you can, if you're part of the program, which was part of the problem, then you can just call this number and the cab will pick you up and take you to work, which allowed a lot of, people with disabilities that wanted to work an opportunity to get to, their actual place of employment. But I really do wish, I always feel like we're not doing enough for the disabilities community. I feel like there's so much more that we can be doing, but it becomes difficult when the state has so much jurisdiction over those matters, that we haven't really been able to make a dent. We just introduced actually a bill on closed caption, or we actually have it on hold, to ensure that, and this is, again, these are the advocates that are asking for these things. So, asking that whenever you attend a restaurant, like, who notices these things, right? You don't even notice. You go into a restaurant, you're watching TV, you don't, but closed captioning is really important, right? For people that, that need it. And so, yeah. So we do the best that we can, but I feel like if there was one part of the committee that really didn't work as well, that where we, I think, are like lackluster, and I would give us a definitely at least a C- on, would be that part of the committee.
I have to say, and again, I worked in politics for a long time. I think you're the first elected official I have ever heard give herself a C- in something. That is, I kind of feel like I should mark this date down in my calendar, because
I feel bad about it.
No, it's, I think that's, that's how things get better, right? By recognizing where the shortcomings are. Let me ask you a couple of final questions, see if there's any other questions in the chat, and then we'll begin to wrap up. I mentioned to you before we got started in this conversation, in the sort of pregame, you were in a really tough race for city council, yeah. Right? Your race was, if not the closest race in the entire city in 2017, then certainly one of the most, right? One of the closest. Tell me a little bit about how you do, as somebody who didn't come from political background, what worked for you? What do you think made the difference in this race that you think, if you're interested in politics, here's a piece of advice that I'm going to give to you. Yeah.
I think my situation was very unique, but I consider myself a social worker at heart, and I look at everything from that lens. So I've been in this community, representing this community in one capacity or another for over 25 years now. And so people know who I am. So when I decided to run, when I said, I finally said yes, people were really excited about it, to my surprise. Like I just always assumed that nobody's gonna want me, right? And everybody was really excited about that. But before then, I had gone to every, I go to every meeting. I still do that today. I go to people's homes. I visit them in the nursing, the nursing home, in the hospital. I'm very community oriented, and I think that the community was really desperate for that. They really want that. They want representatives that not only remind them of themselves, but that are available, right? That make themselves available in that way. So I think that was really, an advantage that I had. Now, I did run against a sitting assembly member at the time, but I ran first. He ran against me. And so I think that they really underestimated the power of community, right? And that people are like, listen, I like you, but I love the fact that she shows up all of the time, right? I love the idea that I can pick up my phone and call her on her cell phone and she's gonna pick up. I love that, right? It's very different. But again, I'm not a politician. I mean, I'm a politician now by nature, but I don't consider myself one, right? And so even somebody told me the other day, well, you were there, the politicians on the comment. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm there all the time. She's like, you're a family. Like, you don't count anymore. And I think that's the way I think that that's the way that most people in my community see me, because I'm everywhere. I'm like white rice.
That's a reference that may be
That's our,
lost on people
yes.
who did not grow up in the Caribbean, but I understand you. The last thing I want to ask, and let me preface it by saying that I know that I would likely not ask this question of a male elected official, but I am going to ask it because I think it's an important thing for our students to hear. Tell me a little bit about your mom, your grandmother. You have your parents living at home. In our
Yes.
culture, that stuff falls disproportionately and heavily on women. And so it helped me and help us to understand a little bit how, if at all, you managed to find some balance between, you know, your personal responsibilities, which are significant, and, you know, your responsibilities to be family to the community.
Yeah, well, I'm the second eldest, so I was parentified very young. Unfortunately, I was my mother's second right hand,
Yeah.
and I helped raise her children. So, my grandmother's 89 this year. She's so sweet, so cute. I didn't have much of a relationship with her growing up because my mother moved to New York City when I was so young, and we really didn't have the money, the resources to travel back to the island. And my grandmother
Right.
didn't have the resources to travel here. So that's one of the unfortunate realities, right? Is that you start losing that connection with family. Now that I'm older, now that I'm able, like I go back every year, and now I drag them all with me. So it becomes like a whole family affair because I have that kind of like that guilt that,
Sure.
they otherwise wouldn't be able to do that. But I also reflect on how many years we've lost in my grandmother, how much of that history is no longer, we can't make up. But my mother had a serious mental health breakdown a few years ago. And at the same time, my brother and my sister were going through the same thing. They all suffer from bipolar, very different types of bipolar. So my mother's very depressive. My sister, is chemically dependent. My brother is almost schizophrenic. And all of this was happening at the same time. But I think that the resilience, because I think for some reason I was just made different, and I just was made to hold a lot. And I'm able to, again, I'm a problem solver, right? That's my nature. It's always been that way. As long as I can remember. I remember being 5 and like, doing that, putting that skill, to work. And moving her in with us was a decision that we made, very easily, because that's what we do, right? We take care of each other. But I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky in that, I have a really great support system in my husband. I have wonderful children who have all chipped in, and we've kind of learned to take care of each other, right? So now, we took care of mom, and we kind of brought her back to life. And doing what she loves to do, cooking and taking care of us, right? But it's we also get to keep an eye on her, and she helps me, right? Without that support, right? That well-rounded support, the universal support of family, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. Because I have, I have a large family that has a lot of very serious issues. And so,
Right.
that's always a priority for me. I always, make sure that they are a priority, to me. But it's difficult, it's not easy. It's not easy work, but it's doable. And I think that if you're interested in public service, I think you should volunteer, come volunteer for me. I mean, come work here. I'm always happy to take students and to show them the ropes, because it's really gratifying work. And, I am very fortunate, and I was very lucky to kind of accidentally land here.
That's a perfect segue to what I think will be the last part of the talk. I want to ask you to tell us, what's your message? We have students, for example, on the chat who want to volunteer to promote disabled rights in the city. We have students all over campus who are working on really important issues. What's your one piece of advice to them about how to enter into public service and really make a significant difference?
Well, the secret that I will share is that at every single event, I have trembled in fear. And I've always underestimated my capacity to do the things that I do. Luckily enough, I've had wonderful people along the way that have kind of helped and nurtured me and pushed me and kind of forced me. But I would say don't underestimate your ability to do the unimaginable. It sits here within all of us, and there's always that fear and anxiety. And I'll tell you that I was at the change in me occurred at an event where I don't remember if it was Speaker Johnson's inauguration, but I remember somebody else was supposed to speak, and it was a prominent person, and for the life of me, I cannot remember. And I think that's on purpose so that I don't ever share who the person was, right? But I remember getting so excited because that person was shaking, like their hands were trembling, and I said, "Oh, thank God, dear Jesus,
I'm not the only one, right?
It's me. It's not just me." And so, but if I allowed fear to stop me, I wouldn't be here today. And so every single day I fight back. I fight back sometimes against my own insecurities to ensure that I am giving the best of me to my community and to the city. And so I think I'm doing okay, and I think that you will do okay. And I am again always excited and happy to open the doors of my office and of my life to anyone that is interested in hearing.
Well, I have to say, you're making me want to get back into politics, and I mean that. I think you're doing okay. You're right. This has been absolutely wonderful, so candid, and I think really inspirational to our students, but also deeply grounded in reality. This is not, to use a very Puerto Rican phrase, even though I'm not Puerto Rican, this is not pajarito preñado, right? This is real stuff. I want to close off the event. First of all, just thank you for coming. Thanks for making it's after 5. I know that things get a little bit crazy. You're busy, COVID, etc. But we really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights with us. I also want to thank the people who helped to organize this, the John Jay Theater and Event Support Services, the Center for Career and Professional Development, the Department of Public Management, the Office of External Affairs, Jennifer Lorenzo, Mindy Bockstein, our folks over at the Latin American and Latino Studies, or Latinx Studies Department, I apologize. A couple things that I want to remind people of. Tomorrow is the last day to fill out the census, so please make sure that you fill out the census if you haven't done so already. Remember to get out and vote. Election day is November 3rd. Very, very important election, obviously. Lots at stake in this elections, and we want to see the John Jay community get out there and vote. And then the last thing, one final thing. I wanted to thank the Office of Interim Vice Chancellor Rosa for her support for this project as well. This program is great. We've done a couple of these before, and I always walk away really inspired, and I hope you do too. And I hope that you'll keep an eye out for information about additional lectures or discussions in this series, because the people that we've had, we keep on, everyone gets better, and I think we're near the top tonight. So I really want to thank you, Council Member, and thank everyone for joining us this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you again soon.